My name is Sarah, and I'm 32 years old. That October evening was supposed to be a celebration of my parents' 30 years of marriage, but instead, it became the night that changed everything. I'd driven 3 hours from Chicago after closing the biggest deal of my career, my hands still shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home in suburban Detroit, I could see through the dining room window that everyone had already finished eating. The empty plates, the crumpled napkins, the leftover cake sitting abandoned on the table. I was late again, and somehow I already knew I'd be paying for it in more ways than one. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family dinner changed everything forever. I'm a 32-year-old named Sarah, and on that particular October evening, what was meant to be a celebration for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary turned into a pivotal moment that altered my entire life. Having just finalized the most significant business deal of my professional life, I had just completed a 3-hour drive from Chicago, my hands still trembling from a mix of exhilaration and fatigue. When I arrived at the familiar driveway of my childhood home in suburban Detroit, a glance through the dining room window revealed that the family meal had concluded. I could see the deserted table with its discarded plates, used napkins, and an untouched piece of cake. I was once again late, and a sense of foreboding told me that the consequences would be more than just a missed dinner. Before I share the events of that night, please leave a comment about where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss how this family get-together changed everything for good. The front door was unlocked, as it always was. I entered the house that had been my home for years, inhaling the comforting scent of my mother's apple cinnamon candles mixed with the faint aroma of pot roast. The old hardwood floors groaned under my heels as I headed for the dining room, my designer purse feeling heavier with each step. I could hear their voices before I saw them, the easy, comfortable conversation of a family that had shared a meal without me. "Sarah's here," my mother, Linda, announced, her voice holding the same reserved tone I'd known all my life, not one of excitement or warmth, but of a quiet acceptance that the latecomer had finally arrived. The dining room became uncomfortably silent as I stood in the doorway. There they were, my entire family, gathered around the mahogany table that had been the backdrop for countless birthdays, holidays, and arguments. My father, Robert, with his neatly combed gray hair, was seated at the head, wearing the blue sweater I'd bought him last Christmas. My mother, Linda, was efficiently, and with a hint of irritation, clearing plates. My sister Jessica, 29 and always struggling, sat with her husband Kevin. Both of them looked at me with expressions I couldn't decipher. My brother Michael, the youngest at 26, was slumped in his chair next to his girlfriend, Amy, his guitarist fingers rhythmically tapping against his beer bottle. "Sorry I'm late," I said, placing my purse on the sideboard. The Morrison deal took longer than I expected, and traffic coming out of the city was crazy. "The Morrison deal," Jessica repeated, her voice laced with a mixture of sarcasm and bitterness. "Always an excuse with you, isn't it, Sarah?" I'd heard this tone before. It was the same one she'd used when I graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University while she was dropping out of community college. The same tone when I purchased my condo in Lincoln Park while she was, for the third time, moving back in with our parents. The same tone when I established my financial planning business while she was working a part-time job at Target. "It was a major client," I said softly, taking the empty chair they'd saved for me. The plate in front of me was cold, the mashed potatoes were solidified, and the green beans were limp and unappetizing. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you put a lot of work into dinner." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "It's fine, honey. We saved you a plate." But the sound of her voice told me it was far from fine. As I quietly ate my cold meal, I couldn't help but reflect on a recurring pattern that had developed over the years. Ever since I'd earned a full scholarship for college and built my own business from nothing, family gatherings had taken on a new, strange dynamic. I was simultaneously the person they proudly talked about to their friends and the outsider who had somehow become too big for her own good. I remembered being 8 years old and winning the school spelling bee, and how proud they were of me. But somewhere along the way, that pride had transformed into something else. Perhaps it was when I no longer needed their assistance, or maybe it was when they started needing mine. The conversation continued around me as I ate. Stories about Jessica's children, updates on Michael's latest show at some downtown dive bar, and Kevin's complaints about his supervisor at the factory. It was typical family conversation, except for the way they all seemed to be performing for an audience of one. Me, the successful one, the one with the money. I thought about the 3-hour drive I had just completed, how much I had looked forward to seeing everyone and celebrating my parents' anniversary. I had even stopped at a Chicago florist to pick up an expensive arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. The flowers were still in my car, forgotten in my rush to get inside and apologize for being late to yet another family event. As I pushed the lukewarm food around my plate, a realization made my stomach churn. This felt less like a warm welcome home and more like a business meeting, and I had a sinking feeling that I knew exactly what kind of business was about to be discussed. After I finished poking at my cold dinner, Mom began clearing the table with a focused energy she only had when she was building up to something. Dad went to his recliner with a beer, and my siblings lingered in the dining room, their small talk feeling strained and full of anticipation. "Sarah, honey," Mom said, her voice adopting that sweet, cautious tone I had come to dread over the years. "Could you come into the kitchen for a minute?" I followed her into the familiar space where I'd once done my homework at the counter, where she had bandaged my scraped knees, and where we'd had our deep, heart-to-heart talks when I was a teenager worried about boys and college applications. But now, as an adult, the kitchen had become the place where she made her requests. She reached into the drawer where she kept important documents, the same drawer that had once held my report cards and permission slips. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a white, already sealed envelope. "Your father and I," she began, avoiding eye contact, "are having a little difficulty with the mortgage payment this month. You know how it is with the economy." I was familiar with this routine. I'd heard variations of it dozens of times over the past 5 years, ever since I had started earning a substantial income and the family found out I was doing well for myself. These conversations had become as predictable as the changing seasons. "How much?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just $1,000, she said quickly, holding out the envelope. "It's just until Robert's pension starts next month. You know we'll pay it back." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the crisp bills inside. $1,000. Enough to cover my own mortgage for 2 months. Enough for a weekend getaway I had been planning. Enough to put toward the European vacation I had dreamed of for 3 years but kept postponing because someone in the family always needed something. "Mom," I said carefully, "didn't Dad's pension already kick in? I thought that happened 6 months ago." She busied herself wiping down the already clean counters. "Well, yes, but you know how these things are. There are always unexpected expenses." I thought about the last unexpected expense. 3 months ago, it was for Jessica's car repair, $2,500 for a transmission that, according to Kevin, could have been fixed for half the price if they had been more resourceful. Before that, it was for Michael's music equipment. A new amplifier, a better guitar, recording software he promised would help him finally make it big, an $8,000 expense over 2 years. And before that, there were Dad's medical bills from his heart scare. Even though when I called the hospital to set up a payment plan, they told me his insurance had already paid the bills in full. Standing there in the kitchen, holding the envelope, the financial advisor in me started adding up the numbers in my head. In the past 5 years, I had given my family over $40,000. Loans that were never repaid, gifts that were expected rather than appreciated, and emergencies that seemed to happen with suspicious regularity. "Of course, Mom," I heard myself say, the words coming out automatically after years of repetition. "Whatever you need." But as we walked back into the dining room, something felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the 14-hour days I'd worked to close the Morrison deal. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been gnawing at me since I broke up with Mark 6 months ago, partly because he couldn't understand why I was always sending money to my family. Or maybe it was the dawning realization that I had missed dinner yet again because I had been working to pay for everyone else's lives. Jessica looked up as we entered the room, her eyes immediately darting to the envelope in my hand. A genuine smile, the first one I had seen all evening, spread across her face. "Let me guess," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom needs a little help with something." The room went quiet. Kevin and Amy shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Michael stared into his beer bottle. Dad pretended to be absorbed in the football highlights on TV, though I could see he was listening. "It's just a small loan," Mom said defensively. Jessica let out a sharp, mocking laugh that made me flinch. "A loan, right? Like all the other loans Sarah's given us that we've totally paid back." She stood up, walking toward me with a swagger she got when she'd been drinking. "Come on, Sarah. We all know what this is. You're our ATM, our personal bank of Sarah. Need money for bills? Call Sarah. Need money for car repairs? Call Sarah. Need money for anything at all? Just press the Sarah button and money comes out." The room erupted in laughter. Kevin snorted. Amy giggled behind her hand. Even Michael cracked a smile. Dad chuckled from his chair, raising his beer bottle in a mock toast. "You're our ATM," Jessica repeated louder this time, playing to her audience. "Just push the right buttons, and out comes the cash." I stood there paralyzed, holding the envelope while my family laughed at a joke that I didn't find funny. I looked around the room at the people I had loved my entire life, the people I had sacrificed for, worked extra hours for, and postponed my own dreams for, and I realized something that made my chest tighten with panic. They weren't laughing with me, they were laughing at me. And even worse, they were laughing at the situation they had created, the dynamic they had established, and the role they had forced me into without ever asking if I wanted to play it. I thought about Mark, how he had tried to explain this to me months ago. "They're using you, Sarah," he had said during one of our final arguments. "Can't you see that they call, you write a check, they have a problem, you solve it with money? That's not love, that's exploitation." I had defended them then, called him jealous, and accused him of not understanding family loyalty. But standing in that dining room, watching them laugh about how simple it was to get money from me, I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me. The laughter eventually died down, but the sound echoed in my ears like a ringing bell. I stood there, holding that envelope, feeling something inside my chest crack. It wasn't anger yet, but something deeper, more fundamental. It was the sound of an illusion shattering. I looked down at the $1,000 bill I had pulled from the envelope. The crisp, green paper represented 2 weeks of 14-hour days, countless client meetings, missed lunches, skipped workouts, and postponed social events. This single bill represented the life I had built through sacrifice and discipline, the success I had earned through sleepless nights and relentless determination. My hands began to shake. I thought about my childhood, how I had been the good daughter, the one who earned straight A's, never got into trouble, and always did what was expected. I remembered being 12 years old, beaming with pride when Mom bragged to her friends about my honor roll certificate. I remembered being 16, working a part-time job at the grocery store to save money for college while Jessica spent her weekends at parties and Michael learned guitar instead of doing his homework. I remembered being 22, fresh out of Northwestern with my business degree, while my parents beamed with pride at my graduation. "Our Sarah," Dad had said that day, "she's going to do great things. She's going to take care of all of us." Take care of all of us. When had that become my responsibility? When had my success become their safety net? When had my love been reduced to the size of my bank account? I looked around the room again. Jessica was back in her chair, still smirking, pleased with her joke. Kevin was scrolling through his phone, already bored with the entertainment. Michael was tuning his guitar, probably getting ready to ask me to listen to his latest song, the one he had been working on with equipment I had bought for him. Mom was in the kitchen washing dishes, probably already planning how to spend the money she assumed I would give her. Dad was still in his recliner, still pretending to watch TV, still avoiding eye contact. They were all so comfortable with this arrangement, so comfortable with the idea that Sarah would always come through. Sarah would always say yes. Sarah would always write the check and ask no questions and expect nothing in return except the privilege of being needed. But what about what I needed? When was the last time any of them had asked how I was doing? Really doing, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. When was the last time someone in this room had offered to help me with something, anything, without expecting payment in return? I tried to remember the last time Jessica had called just to chat, just to see how I was. I couldn't. Every phone call from my sister started with small talk and ended with a request. Michael was the same way. Even my parents had fallen into this pattern, checking in on my business success but never asking about my personal life. My hopes, my fears, my dreams that had nothing to do with money. The $1,000 bill felt heavier in my hands, like it was made of lead instead of paper. I thought about all the things I had given up for this family, the vacation to Italy I had planned and cancelled when Dad needed that medical emergency fund, the down payment on a house I had been saving for, money that went to Jessica's car repair instead, and the romantic weekend getaway Mark had planned for us, which I had skipped because Michael needed help with his rent. I thought about Mark, how patient he had been in the beginning, how he had tried to understand my family obligations. But gradually, I had watched him get frustrated, then hurt, then angry, and finally just tired. Tired of coming second to people who didn't seem to appreciate what I was sacrificing for them. "You're not their daughter," he had said during our last fight. "You're their retirement plan." I had been furious with him then. How dare he reduce my family relationships to something so crass and transactional? But now, standing in this room, holding this money while they waited for me to hand it over like I always did, I wondered if he had been right. The silence grew. They were all watching me now, probably wondering why I was taking so long. Usually, I just handed over the money with a smile and maybe a gentle suggestion about budgeting or finding additional income sources. I was always so gracious about it, so understanding, so willing to help. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I didn't want to be understanding. I didn't want to be gracious. I didn't want to help. I wanted to be helped. I wanted to be asked about my day, my work, and my life outside of my bank account. I wanted someone in this room to care about me as a person, not as a source of funding. "Sarah," Mom's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Honey, is everything okay?" Everyone was staring at me now. Jessica's smirk had faded into confusion. Michael had stopped tuning his guitar. Even Dad had turned away from the TV to look at me. I held up the $1,000 bill, watching it flutter slightly in my trembling hand. 5 years of this, 5 years of being the family ATM, as Jessica had so eloquently put it. 5 years of sacrificing my own dreams, my own relationships, and my own happiness to fund their comfort. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Time seemed to slow down as I looked at that bill in my hand. $1,000. Such a small amount compared to what I made in a year, but somehow it represented everything that was wrong with my relationship with this family. I thought about the Morrison deal I had closed just hours earlier. 18 months of preparation, dozens of meetings, and hundreds of hours of research and proposal writing. The client had chosen my firm over 3 larger competitors because of my attention to detail, my genuine care for their financial future, and my commitment to their success. When they had signed the contract, Mr. Morrison had shaken my hand and said, "Sarah, you're exactly the kind of person we want managing our money. Someone who understands that trust is earned, not demanded." But here in this room, my family demanded my financial support without earning it. They expected it, assumed it, and laughed about how easy it was to get it. There was no gratitude, no reciprocity, and no respect for the sacrifices I made to provide it. I looked at Jessica, still sitting there with that self-satisfied expression, probably already thinking about what she'd spend her share of my money on. I looked at Michael, who hadn't contributed a dime to tonight's dinner but would probably ask me for gas money before I left. I looked at my parents, who had raised me to be generous and caring but had twisted those virtues into something that served only them. "You know what?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're absolutely right, Jessica." She blinked, confused by my calm tone. "I am your ATM." I continued, holding up the bill. "That's exactly what I am to all of you. Not a daughter, not a sister, Not a person with feelings and dreams and needs of my own. Just a machine that dispenses money whenever you press the right buttons. Sarah, Mom said, her voice full of warning. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to see dramatic? I held the $1,000 bill up high, making sure everyone in the room could see it clearly. Then, before I could second-guess myself, before I could fall back into the old patterns of compliance and people-pleasing, I began to tear it. The room erupted. Sarah, no. Mom shrieked, lunging toward me. What the hell are you doing? Dad roared, jumping up from his recliner. Are you insane? Jessica screamed, scrambling toward me as I tore the bill into smaller and smaller pieces. But I kept tearing, methodically, deliberately, letting the pieces fall to the floor like green confetti. Each rip felt like freedom. Each piece that fluttered to the ground was a weight lifting off my shoulders. Stop it! Kevin yelled. That's $1,000. I know exactly what it is, I said, my voice calm amid the chaos. It's the price of my self-respect, and I'm not paying it anymore. You ungrateful little, Jessica snarled, her face red with rage. After everything we've done for you, I stopped tearing and looked at her, really looked at her, at this woman who shared my DNA but had just called me names for refusing to fund her lifestyle. What have you done for me, Jessica? Specifically. In the last 5 years, what have you done for me that didn't involve asking for money? She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. That's what I thought, I said quietly. I let the last pieces of the bill fall from my fingers and watched them settle on the floor among the other debris of my former compliance. Sarah Elizabeth, Dad said in his sternest voice, the one he had used when I was a child caught in some mischief. You pick up every piece of that money right now and apologize to your mother. I looked at him, this man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework and walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. This man who now saw me as nothing more than a solution to his financial problems. No, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. No, he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. No, I said again, stronger this time. I'm not picking it up. I'm not apologizing. And I'm not giving you any more money. Ever. You selfish bitch, Jessica spat. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? With your fancy job and your expensive clothes and your perfect life. My perfect life. I laughed bitterly. Jessica, I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years because every time I save money for myself, someone in this family needs something. I broke up with the man I love because he got tired of coming in second to your financial emergencies. I work 70-hour weeks and live in a tiny condo because I'm too busy funding everyone else's dreams to pursue my own. Oh, boo-hoo, she sneered. Poor little rich girl. You want to know what's really sad? I said, looking around the room at all of them. I would have given you that money, just like I always do. All you had to do was treat me like a human being instead of a vending machine. All you had to do was ask nicely, maybe express some gratitude, perhaps show some interest in my life beyond my bank balance. We are grateful, Mom said weakly. Are you? I asked. When's the last time you called to ask how I was doing without needing money? When's the last time any of you offered to help me with something? When's the last time you treated me like family instead of like a charitable organization? The silence that followed was deafening. That's what I thought, I said, picking up my purse from the sideboard. I'm done. I'm done being your ATM. I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done sacrificing my life for people who don't even see me as a person. If you walk out that door, Dad said, his voice cold, don't bother coming back. I stopped at the doorway and turned back to look at him. You know what, Dad? That's the first honest thing any of you have said to me all night. And with that, I walked out of my childhood home, leaving the torn pieces of money scattered on the floor behind me and carrying nothing with me but my dignity and my determination to never let anyone treat me like that again. The drive back to Chicago felt unlike any journey I had ever taken. My hands were steady on the steering wheel for the first time in months, maybe years. The highway stretched out before me, lit by my headlights, and for the first time in forever, I felt like I was driving toward something instead of running away from it. The first week was the most difficult. My phone constantly buzzed with texts and voicemails from my family. Dad's messages were angry and accusatory. Mom's were manipulative and guilt-laden. Jessica's were vicious, filled with name-calling and threats. Michael's were the most painful because they seemed genuinely confused, as if he truly couldn't understand why I was upset. I let them all go to voicemail. I read the texts but didn't respond. For the first time in my adult life, I was protecting my own peace instead of managing everyone else's emotions. After 3 days of non-stop harassment, I did something I had never imagined I would have the courage to do. I blocked all their numbers. The silence that followed was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I threw myself into my work with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant stress of family financial drama, my mind was clearer, sharper. I closed 2 major deals in the first month after the anniversary dinner, earning more in commission than I had given my family in the entire previous year. But more importantly, I started therapy. Dr. Helen Martinez was recommended by a colleague who had noticed a change in my demeanor. "You seem lighter," she had said, "but also sadder, like you're grieving something." She was right. I was grieving. I was mourning the family I had thought I had, the relationships I had believed were real, the love I had assumed was unconditional. Codependency often masquerades as love, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. You've been trained to equate your worth with your usefulness. Your family has taught you that love is transactional, that you have to pay for affection and acceptance. It was painful to hear, but it was also validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't ungrateful. I was a person who had been systematically conditioned to believe that my value lay solely in what I could provide for others. The hardest part of healing from family dysfunction, she continued, is accepting that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally didn't know how to do that. They loved you, but only within the limits of what you could do for them. I started keeping a journal, documenting my feelings and experiences as I navigated this new reality. I wrote about the relief I felt when my phone wasn't constantly buzzing with requests for money. I wrote about the guilt that still gnawed at me, wondering if Jessica's kids had enough to eat, if my parents were truly struggling, if Michael was okay. But I also wrote about the new experiences I was having. I took a weekend art class and discovered I had a talent for watercolor painting. I joined a hiking group and made friends who knew nothing about my income level and didn't care. I started dating again, meeting men who were interested in me as a person, not as a source of financial security. Most importantly, I began to understand what healthy relationships looked like. In a therapy group, I met other people who had struggled with similar family dynamics. I learned that real love doesn't come with invoices, that genuine care doesn't require payment, and that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect and reciprocity. 3 months into my self-imposed family exile, I ran into my old college roommate, Rachel, at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. We hadn't talked much since graduation, but she greeted me with a huge smile and an invitation to catch up. "You look amazing," she said as we settled into a corner booth with our lattes. Different, happier. I found myself telling her everything, about the family dynamics, the anniversary dinner, the torn money, the therapy, and the healing. She listened without judgment, nodding at all the right moments and asking thoughtful questions. "I tried to tell you about this in college," she said gently when I finished. "Do you remember sophomore year when you were working 3 jobs to send money home while Jessica was posting pictures of her spring break trip to Cancun?" I did remember. I had been angry with Rachel then, defensive about my family's honor. Now I realized she had been trying to protect me from something she could see clearly but that I was too close to recognize. "I'm sorry I didn't listen," I said. "You weren't ready to hear it then," she replied. Sometimes we have to learn these lessons on our own timeline. Rachel became my first real friend in years, someone who valued my thoughts, opinions, and company without any expectation of financial benefit. Through her, I met other people who became my chosen family, individuals who supported me through genuine affection rather than economic necessity. As autumn turned to winter, I began to notice changes in myself that went beyond just the absence of financial stress. I was sleeping better, eating better, and exercising regularly. My work performance continued to improve, and I was promoted to senior partner at my firm for the first time in years. I was living within my means and actually saving money for my own future. But the most significant change was in my confidence. I had spent so many years walking on eggshells around my family, afraid to set boundaries, afraid to say no, and afraid to disappoint them. Now I was learning to trust my own instincts, to speak up for myself, and to prioritize my own needs without guilt. The holidays were challenging. Thanksgiving came and went with no communication from my family. I spent it with Rachel and her boyfriend, cooking dinner together and sharing stories about what we were grateful for. Christmas was harder. Despite everything, I missed the familiar chaos of my childhood home, the traditions we had shared, and the feeling of belonging somewhere. I sent cards to my parents and siblings, simple ones with no money inside and no lengthy explanations. Just, "Merry Christmas, love, Sarah." I didn't know if they had been received or if they had been thrown away unopened. In January, I got an unexpected phone call at work. The number wasn't blocked, which meant it was someone new or someone calling from a different phone. "Sarah." The voice was tentative, uncertain. "Michael." "Yeah, it's me. I'm calling from work. Listen, I know you probably don't want to talk to any of us, but I wanted you to know that Jessica lost her job last month." I felt the familiar tug of obligation, the old programming kicking in. My first instinct was to ask how much they needed, how I could help, and what I could do to fix the situation. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry to hear that. How is she handling it?" "Not great," Michael admitted. "She's been calling around looking for work, but things are tight right now. Kevin's hours got cut too." He paused, clearly waiting for me to offer assistance. "When I didn't," he continued. "The thing is, Sarah, we all kind of realized something after you left that night. We never really thought about how much you were doing for all of us. Mom and Dad had to take out a second mortgage to cover their expenses. Jessica and Kevin had to move into a smaller apartment. I had to sell some of my equipment to make rent." "I see," I said neutrally. "It made us realize that maybe we were taking advantage of you without even knowing it." Maybe without even knowing it. The qualifiers annoyed me, but I recognized this as progress for Michael. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "Would you maybe want to have coffee sometime? Just you and me. I promise I won't ask you for money or anything. I just miss talking to my sister." I was surprised by how much his words affected me. Michael had always been the baby of the family, the one I had felt most protective of. Despite everything, I missed him too. "Okay," I said, "but we meet somewhere public and we split the check." He laughed, a sound I hadn't realized I had missed. "Deal." We met the following Saturday at a small cafe near Northwestern's campus. Michael looked older somehow, more serious. He had gotten a haircut and was dressed more conservatively than usual. "I got a day job," he said when I commented on his appearance, "at a music store downtown. It's not much, but it's steady." We talked for 2 hours, really talked, like we hadn't in years. He told me about his struggles with feeling like a failure, how he had been using my financial support as a crutch to avoid growing up. I told him about therapy, about the loneliness I had felt in my success, and about the relief of finally putting myself first. "I don't think I ever thanked you," he said as we were getting ready to leave, "for all the help over the years. I just always assumed you were fine with it because you never said you weren't." "I didn't know how to say I wasn't," I admitted. "I thought that's what love looked like, taking care of everyone else first." "That's not love," Michael said quietly. "That's martyrdom. And martyrs don't get to have real relationships because everyone else is too busy being grateful to get to know them as people." I was impressed by his insight. My little brother was growing up.